Yes, en we zijn live om 1 uur sharp. Zoals altijd, donderdag van 1 tot 2. Een live Q&A. Ik ben Aldo Wink, initiatiefnemer van de InDemand B2B community, waar we met elkaar praten en ervaringen delen over demand generation. En mijn gast is Ferdinand. En volgens mij komt hij er nu net binnenlopen. Ik ga hem erbij zetten nu. Last minute. En je bent er, Ferdinand. You are in a car.
Yes, I've had the most chaotic last couple of hours. I will spare you the details, but I am here and ready to go.
Okay, well, let's do it then. I've never had a guest who was in my studio from a car, but hey, anything is possible these days, right? So,
Well, I'll make sure to make up for it with the right insights. I got stuck for 30 minutes in a parking garage where the door had broken down. So
okay, no problem. Can you guys still hear me? Because, yeah, okay, perfect. Can you please introduce yourself to the audience, Ferdinand?
yes,
You're
Ferdinand,
South
both
African, I
goes.
think, right?
Sorry?
Are you South African? This is a guess, but are you South African or no?
No,
Ferdinand,
I'm German British, so it's not that far
oh,
off, I guess.
German British. Oh, okay. Okay. Tell us who is Ferdinand?
Yes, yeah, my name's Ferdinand Goetzen. I'm one of the founding partners of the Growth Syndicate. Um, I've been basically working in B2B marketing growth for the better part of, well over a decade now. I started my career, excuse me, I started my career in very small scale local B2C marketing, like marketing local dentistries and local medical clinics and these sort of things, working for agencies. And then about 10 years ago, I moved to Amsterdam because I wanted to get closer to the tech scene. I started at a company called Growth Tribe very early on, was one of the lead trainers, helped build some of the courses and the content there. Later became the head of growth and then chief marketing officer of a company called Recruity. And after that, I was the director of marketing and growth at a company called 3D Hubs. So that was kind of my growth leader journey. I've taken several companies from 1 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 50, 50 to 100 million. That's kind of the range in which I've operated. Mixture of B2B companies, SaaS, marketplaces, professional services. I even founded my own company, Reveal, which I sold in November 2023. And then last year, I wanted to go back to my roots. I wanted to go back to helping companies grow their business, especially B2B tech companies. So we started together with Jolene van Grieken and Clément Dumont. We started the Growth Syndicate. And in very simple terms, we are a team of growth experts, leaders that embed ourselves in organizations. And we kind of present an alternative option to the usual agencies and consultants that a lot of companies tend to opt for. So we're a fractional
Mhm.
team that help companies basically unlock growth, and we're usually in and out in 9 months. That's kind of our model.
Right. Okay. So, and yeah, well, you guys, I've noticed you guys for the last year in my feed, sharing all kinds of great insights. And I think we have a mutual, well, let's say, vision on B2B marketing, sharing the demand gen vision. When did this all start for you, demand generation? Is this something new for you guys, or has this always been some kind of a mindset for you?
I think probably until a certain point in time, I would have described it as brand. I think a lot of what is currently described as demand gen for a long time, people talked about brand a lot, and that became this umbrella term that covered maybe a lot of what you would see as demand generation today. I've always tried to market I've always tried to think on two tracks, which is, the companies that are currently buying and the companies that might buy one day. And I've always had ideas, campaigns, messages, value propositions, thoughts around how to market separately towards those two groups of buyers and potential buyers. I think that's usually an easy split. I didn't really call it demand generation until a year ago. I still don't always use the term demand generation. I'm not a big fan of semantic debate, even though I sometimes get caught up into it. So I don't really care what it gets called, but the idea that you need to be a player in a market for an audience so that when they decide to buy, they know about you. That is an idea I've worked with since several years. And it's probably an idea that goes back to the very origins of marketing, to be honest.
Hmm. Well, I mean, of course, demand generation is something that's been around for a long time already, right? It's started in the end of the 90s, and then suddenly we all became lead gen marketers, playing a different playbook. What are your thoughts? What changed in the last 2 3 years that suddenly demand gen has become a main topic again?
Yeah, I think you're right. Like this demand gen is not nothing new, but I think the focus on it is renewed. And I think the reason for that is really simple. It's the way I always look at it is, traditionally back in the day, you had big broadcast approach to marketing, right? You'd create big ads, big campaigns, you would target a lot of people, and you would hope that some of those people are ready to buy and that it resonates and they maybe try to buy your product. Some people might remember you for the future. And it's happened largely in the B2C world, right? B2B companies didn't do a lot of marketing. I mean, there are maybe some exceptions, events, PR, that might have been an element, but really kind of like targeted marketing approaches was not a thing that B2B companies did so much. B2B companies are traditionally very sales driven. And then with the advent of kind of like tech companies, they became very product driven in some cases. It's really B2C companies where marketing was a key player on the strategic level, right? This is where this whole the 4 Ps of marketing, product, if you take Don Perignon, it's as much a marketing is as important as the product itself because there's probably 50 other champagnes that taste equally good but have terrible marketing. So in the B2C, especially FMCG, big level enterprise consumer companies, marketing was a big thing. In B2B companies, less so. And what really changed is in the 90s, the kind of the emergence of search-based advertising. And for the first time ever with Google Ads, even before that, there were some players, the predecessors of Google Ads, you could actually target intent. And once you could target intent, marketing suddenly became tangible enough for very traditional B2B sales leaders and founders to start paying more attention to marketing. And I think that doesn't mean B2B companies weren't focusing on brand and some marketing activities before, but you really around the late 90s and early 2000s had this rise of search engine advertising. For the first time ever, if somebody was looking to buy a CRM, a pair of shoes, whatever, you could actually target them in the moment they were looking for this product and put your brand in front of them. And I think we've had this 15 years of, I would say, golden age where if you had a lot of money in the bank, you could probably grow your business to 20, 30 million in revenue only with demand capture, right? Basically capturing existing demand on the market through things like Google Ads. And the second thing, sales, outbound sales. So if you had some basic brand positioning and website in place, you had a demand capture engine and you had outbound sales, you could get pretty far. And what has changed is in the last 5 to 10 years, that is no longer the case. That there is more competition than ever before. There is more noise than ever before. All the channels that are part of what you describe as the lead gen kind of mania, they're all tapped out, right? The HubSpot is losing millions in traffic. WebMD just lost 80% of their traffic. So the usual SEO blue ocean is all dried up. The Google Ads search volume is heavily saturated. Um, and there's more noise than ever, right? Like with AI, it's easier to build products. So there's more competition. It's easier to create content. So there's more competition on the content side, and there's more noise. There's kind of crappy bots and these kind of things posting and commenting on people's LinkedIn's. So essentially, we're in a situation where there's more noise than ever. There's more saturation than ever. So that kind of demand capture playbook just isn't enough. And it can still be valuable for some companies, but it's not enough to grow a 10, 50, $100 million business. It's just not enough to get you there. So if you cannot capture enough demand to keep going. I mean, we sometimes talk to companies that said, oh, we got 200 leads last year from Google Ads. This year we want to make 400, but they already saturated 90% of the search volume. Well, if you cannot double search volume from one day to the next, the only way you can actually double search volume is by generating demand, by creating more search, by creating more awareness of the kind of solution that you're offering in a market. And I think this oversaturation we're seeing in the last 5 years, combined with the fact that drop in funding, push for profitability, it's basically harder than ever to do good marketing. And you can't get away with not good marketing anymore. And I think that's really what's changed in the last 5 to 10 years, especially the last 5 years, especially with COVID, this saturation and generative AI, the saturation has reached this crazy peak. And I think that's now why companies are starting to say, I cannot just rely on the people currently buying. I need to have a plan for the people who aren't currently buying. And that's really where that shift to demand generation is coming from, I think.
Yep, absolutely. So this is a Q&A, and I've had some questions for you organized and prepared. But I always start with a question to the audience. I don't know, where are you located at the moment? So, at what place are you? Have you tapped in? Where are you at the moment, Ferdinand? In your car?
I'm in my car just outside of Malaga right now in Spain, the south of Spain.
Spain at the moment. Serious? Okay, great. What are you
I
doing?
live here half the year. I live here half the year.
I didn't know that. So I'm on the other part, on the other side of Spain at the moment, in Moreira.
Okay,
So
nice.
great. Okay, excellent. So please let us know in the comments where you are at the moment. I have some questions prepared for Ferdinand, and please feel free to ask and just put your questions in there. So the first question I have for you is because we are going to talk about balancing demands, brand and demand and performance, but you are mainly focused on IT, technology. So what discussions do you have talking to founders and sales leaders who want immediate results? How do you convince them investing in brand and demand with driving long term growth? Because basically they're all screaming for leads, right? How what type of discussions do you experience every day?
Yeah, I think I talked about how traditionally B2B companies didn't do as much marketing as B2C companies. And I think you see that when you look at the kind of people that found B2B tech companies, right? If you look at B2B tech founders, some have marketing backgrounds, but most of them have either engineering, product, or sales backgrounds. 99%, I would venture. And that's just from my experience. I'm sure the exact percentage is maybe 94, 92, but it's pretty high. I think 9 out of 10 9 out of 10 B2B founders, especially 9 out of 10 successful B2B founders, have a sales or product background. And that's because you can go quite far with a B2B tech company, especially if you have big ticket items, like if you do big sales items like enterprise, you can go quite far with sales and product. Like that is the reality in a B2B. Like in a B2B reality, you could often go quite far with sales and product. So marketing plays a different role. And I know we've debated this a bit, Aldo, on comment sections, the chief revenue officer versus the chief marketing officer. I actually don't know if the chief marketing officer has a place in the future B2B tech company. And it comes back to what you're talking about, which is you need to be able to get buy-in. And there's a lot of really smart marketers on LinkedIn, and there's a bit of an echo chamber where a lot of marketing people are talking about how to do marketing, but they're talking very much in the nitty-gritty, the semantics, the technicalities. And and I've worked with hundreds of B2B tech companies, and the problems I see, 9 out of 10 marketers that fail in B2B tech don't fail because they get the details wrong. They fail because they don't get buy-in, right? Like they get buy-in on the Google ad, they get buy-in on running some automated outbound campaign, but they don't get buy-in on the long-term thought leadership strategy. They don't get buy-in on building brand through events or meetups or content. And this is the area where it starts to become sketchy in terms of getting the buy-in. And that's because a lot of B2B founders have a very technical or a very sales background, which are very measurable, direct, tangibly measurable roles, right? If I reach out to 20 people and I get 5 responses and I get 1 meeting or 3 meetings and I get one customer, that's a tangible, measurable outcome, output to outcome ratio.
Mhm.
Whereas when you're talking about branded demand, it's not as tangible, right? You can look back on a 3, 6, 9, 12-month period, usually more 6 to 12 month period, and you can say, look, this is how these are the numbers, and there's a lot of metrics you can point towards to show we're creating demand in the market, we're creating demand for our specific solution, people are getting interested. There are metrics you can look at to show that, but they are not things you can show in 2 weeks or 4 weeks. You can show early indicators, you can show signals, but a lot of founders are not satisfied with just signals. I see a big difference between first time and second time founders in this. In B2B, I see first time founders tend to be much more show me the results, show me the leads. Whereas I see second time founders tend to be more demand oriented or more open to demand ideas.
But didn't we ruin it ourselves, with the 2012 playbook, the lead gen playbook, instant gratification? I call this
Yeah.
dopamine marketing. Every click is registered. Yeah, so we basically owe it to ourselves. Sales and the CEO, they just want leads, right? They just want instant credit. They just want instant results. Now this has all changed. I mean, attribution is broken. Uh, we're all in dark social channels. How can we, how do we have to explain this to C-level and sales? We still have a long way to go, I think, in that respect.
Yeah, I think the problem is that a lot of what marketing teams work on is fundamentally not impactful. Whether it's demand or capture or generation, I think a lot of marketing teams struggle because they work on very non-impactful things. And I think when you have a bull market where there's money is flowing, and I'm talking really from a B2B tech startup, right? Like it's different when you go into other spaces, it's different when you go into other companies, but that's the, like we've had tons of money in the space. Companies just grew. They just grew and grew and grew. It didn't matter that they were hemorrhaging money on the back end. Nobody cares about that, right? But you see these companies that have raised 100 million and then they grow their revenue from 20 to 40 million. They go like, we doubled our revenue, but you spent 100 million to get 20 million in revenue. That's very
With
poor.
free money, huh? With free money
Yeah,
as well.
it's free
Yeah.
money. It was free money. And I think free money and a bull market can cover up for a lot of stuff. So when you're getting the customers and you're getting the leads and you're getting the conversations, people don't really care whether your ebook downloads actually convert. People don't really care if your nurture emails are getting responses. They don't care about these details when it works. When it doesn't work, they start to really care about the details. And I think you're completely right that we ruined it for ourselves because we were creating kind of brand-oriented content strategies which can create, they can educate the market, they can create demand over time. But we started still trying to treat them the same way as a Google ad campaign, like a high intent Google ad campaign, counting the leads, counting the leads, how many people downloaded this ebook, how many people downloaded this white paper. And I think we shot ourselves in the foot there because, I mean, that stuff just doesn't work, right? It just like very
Yeah.
rarely does it work. I do think there are exceptions in very big level enterprise sales. I think it can work in enterprise. So I do think you can use this playbook to maybe take a slightly less cold outreach approach, but it's not something that works if you're trying to acquire more than 10 customers a year.
Absolutely. So there's this really interesting question from Struyan, CRM lead at Uber, in chiming in from Amsterdam. So yeah, what is your take, Ferdinand, on attracting the right customer in this noisy market? Huh? Being able to do it at scale. This is absolutely right. You know, lead gen. The problem is we just put a lot of people in there in the top of the funnel. We have this concept, flawed concept of somebody in the end will drop out in the bottom. Hey, we have this new customer, but this is also all changed. It's about attracting the right customer. What is your take on that?
Yeah, I think the more noisy something is, the harder it is to stand out. I mean, I think that's just the fundamental. And I think, again, like I'm not against lead generation. I think you can complete, there are legitimate lead gen tactics that work. I know companies that grow really legitimately and significantly on high intent Google ads. I know companies that even have downloadable ebooks and sometimes have a model that works. Every market is different, every user is different. But I think generally the rule is the more noise and the more saturation and the more competition, the harder it is to stand out. And we had this situation where there was a lot of new categories opening. There was not as much competition 10, 15 years ago. So you could get away with mediocre tactics because standing out was not that important. But now standing out is really, really important. And choosing niching down is the easiest way to stand out, always, right? It's easier to stand out if you say, we are the CRM for we are the CRM for mid-sized e-commerce companies is always going to resonate better than we are CRM for everyone, right? And this is kind of a not the best example, but just putting off the top of my head. The more you niche down, the more you can position yourself in a way that stands out. The more
Mm.
differentiated you are, the easier demand generation becomes, because demand generation is about taking your story, your value propositions, the way that you think about a market, a problem that you're solving, and conveying that to your target audience in an effective way, and doing so with a number of touch points that ensures that over a long period of time, they will keep track of your brand, of your product, and they start to associate you with the solution to the problem that they're facing.
Yeah. Don't wait till they go into market. Be relevant to them long before that. I talk a lot about shortlists. is that a big thing in IT? Are a lot of your clients being confronted with, okay, we have this MQL now, but more and more often we hear, okay, guys, we are in market, but we are too late. You are too late, huh? Because we already have this list compiled, and
Yeah.
you guys, you're just not on it. Is this something typical for IT also? Is it relevant?
I think the short list exists everywhere. I just think the difference is, and I think it's maybe less IT or not IT, it's usually the size of company. I think the bigger the company and the more red tape, the more formal the shortlist is. So that ranges from I, as a solo graphic designer, maybe just have a mental shortlist. You know, if I want to start mapping some ideas, I'm probably going to go to Figma. Why? Because everybody in design talks about Figma, thinks about Figma. They've done a great demand play. Figma is a very popular tool amongst designers. So there, it's a mental shortlist, maybe even an unconscious shortlist sometimes, all the way up to government level where you have actual tenures and there's a really formalized shortlist of two or three options. So I think the shortlist always exists. It's just a question of is it a formally, encoded shortlist, or is it more of a kind of a mental, psychological, subconscious shortlist? But I think
Mm.
anytime somebody's buying, looking for a solution, I think 80, 90% of the time they have a short list. They have brands in mind. They have companies that they associate. And this is becoming more and more. The more companies do demand gen, the truer this is, right? If I'm looking to buy a CRM, I already have 3 or 4 CRMs in mind. That doesn't mean that the new CRM can't break into it, but then it depends on a lot of different factors, right? There's the service and product level. Like everybody makes decisions the same way. Whether you're deciding to have a slice of pizza in Amsterdam tomorrow morning, or whether you're deciding to buy real estate, or whether you're deciding to buy enterprise software, the responsibility and risk differs radically, and that of course influences the process. But we tend to first, we become aware of a problem. We then do a bit of research for solutions. Very often that research is heavily biased towards solutions we've heard of before, right? And this is when we talk about communicating to stakeholders, you can talk about demand gen in the context of what they understand, right? A strong brand, if you have a strong brand and you've generated a lot of demand around your solution, people are more likely to open your emails. They're more likely to reply to your outreach. They're more likely to click your listing on Google Ads. You could be ranked fifth and still get better clicks than the first if you have better brand recognition. So I think that's the good demand gen plays, and a strong brand becomes a force multiplier across everything. And I think that short list, it always exists. That doesn't mean you can't win if you're not on the short list, but your chances are a hell of a lot higher if you are.
Oh, a lot less. There is this claim that absolutely not always, or certainly not always, the best product gets chosen. The most well-known product gets chosen. What's your idea?
I think it depends on the industry. I think industries where recommendations and referrals and trust are really important. I think the best product tends to become the best known product. Um,
Because
ha-
the thing is, someone told me, like, why, for instance, Microsoft CRM, right? I think it's one of the most used in terms of users CRM in the world, but
yeah.
it's by far not the best CRM. So how come that many users are active in the world? It's not the best product. It's isn't it just it all comes down to a safe choice.
Yeah, I think with Microsoft, like I agree. I think with Microsoft, it's a little bit hard it's a unique case because Microsoft is an ecosystem. So a lot of people end up in Dynamics or Teams because they're using another Microsoft technology, and it's a land and expand play almost, where they adopted another Microsoft technology which did follow a lot of the usual marketing sales dynamics, but then you're already stuck in that ecosystem. And that's for me, that's a stickiness question. It's stickiness and retention and activation, these kind of things. It's not necessarily a demand gen question. So I think generally the best product always wins in the long run, especially if you're a subscription-based B2B top company, right?
Hmm.
Like we had Srujan from Uber. Like there's a lot of countries where people are now ditching Uber for other products, even though Uber is the most known product. Because in some countries, Uber far dominates over other products, and in some countries it doesn't. right? So if you go to Estonia, Bolt is the rage because it's local, better connections, and they offer a better product service, and they outcompete other players. So I think it really depends. I think Microsoft is one of the few exceptions because you've got maybe 5, 6 companies that just have almost a monopoly on an ecosystem. So I'm not sure how much you could apply the principles of what Microsoft does to your own company. I think most important is to have both. You have to have a great product and you have to be great at distributing that product. One thing that I will say is that as generative AI becomes more and more developed, product differentiation is going to almost disappear. Like,
Mm.
people are going to have all kinds of solutions for delivering instant support. They can have all kinds of solutions for delivering new features. And a lot of products are just going to be wrappers around AI solutions that actually do most of the heavy lifting. So I think if we look 10 years into the future, product differentiation, I think it's even not crazy to suggest that product differentiation won't even be a thing 10 years from now. So if the bottom line here, the question here you know, is there an argument to invest more in brand differentiation than product differentiation? I think there is an argument there. And I think that's going to become stronger in future.
Okay, absolutely. It's always a pleasure to talk to someone who has a strong and clear opinion about things, Ferdinand. That's good. So now I'm a CEO, and I invite you to my office and I say, Ferdinand, we do 10 million ARR, and we want to double our revenue in the next 2 years. Strongly relying on lead gen networking in the past few years, but we notice we are maximizing that at the moment.
Yeah.
What is your advice? What is your play for the next 2 years? What advice will you give me?
Yeah. So first things first, if you are a sales background B2B founder, I'm not going to talk about next 2 years. I'm going to talk about the next 6 months. That's the first
Okay.
thing. Because I think what you care about most is what's going to happen the next 6 months. Because you might say you care about the next 2 years, but if I don't deliver on your expectations the next 6 months, I'm out. CMOs have the shortest tenure of any commercial leadership, especially in B2B. They're in and out very fast. Um, so first and foremost, you need to dive into a company and see, I'd have to dive into your company and understand what's working and what's not working, right? And almost certainly there is a demand capture element in your business. There are exceptions, but generally there is some demand capture you can do, right? And I will usually look for quick wins that will help give you tangible results. Because unfortunately, doing marketing effectively in a business, there's a politics side to it. I would love to come in and say to you, you know what? I'm going to start building out. I'm going to start building out the demand play from day one. Usually, what I'm going to do is the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at your ICP and positioning, and I'm going to make sure that that foundation is clear. Number one thing. Um, ICP positioning and messaging foundation, we do that with every company we work with. That's the first thing. Some companies have it figured out. Most companies don't. Most think they have it figured out, but they don't. You need to have one clear ICP, focus, double down, clear on your positioning. Because if that foundation is shaky, everything else you do is secondary. It doesn't really matter. You can have the best demand play ever. You can have the best brand, the best messaging, the best story, the best thought leadership. If you're not targeting the right people, it's not going to help. So that's first. Once you have that foundation in place, the second thing is I do some kind of analysis. I'd look at what are other players in the market doing, what are other companies with similar dynamics doing, and what have you been doing the last 2 to 5 years. Based on that, I usually have two levels on which I can give you feedback. One is kind of the quick wins level. There are usually in every business, it's very easy from the outside in to go into a business and point 3 or 4 things that could be changed, obviously, because teams and companies, they get stuck in their routines, they get stuck in their processes. And I have the same. If when we work with a client for 9 months, it's very easy to come in and say, hey, why aren't you doing this? So a fresh
What are
perspective
the
always
main
helps.
struggles you experience talking to CEOs, CMOs? What currently describing the type of business I am in? What
The
are the
main
main
three,
struggles? Yeah, at the moment? Why are
main
the
three
struggles?
channels,
No, challenges.
challenges. I think the biggest challenge these companies tend to face, I mean, there's 3 levels. You can generate demand, you can capture demand, and then you can enable revenue. I think this is what a marketing team can do. And I think most companies are pretty okay at demand capture. I think the 3 biggest challenges they have is number one, they're not getting as much business as they want, right? They've been tapping into kind of high intent, short term channels. They've saturated those channels and they're stuck, right? The plateau. They've hit that plateau. Like they figured something out 2 years ago that worked, and they've milked it It still delivers business, but it doesn't deliver that level of growth. That's problem number one. Problem number two is that a lot of value still gets lost along the way. So a lot of the leads, opportunities, business that they capture still falls through the cracks. Low conversion rates, poor activation, poor user expansion in a SaaS context, a lot of churn. These are other second level issues that we often see. And then the third one is that they are not actually contributing to the growth of their market. And that's the demand generation side, that they are not marketing to, they're putting 90% of their efforts into the 5 to 10% of companies that are currently actively buying, right? And then some people like to debate about, how do you know it's 5% or 10%? I say, it doesn't matter. Even if it's 30%, the point stands that most of your market is not buying today. So how are you going to make sure that you position yourself not only to the 30%, 10%, 5%, whatever it may be, the minority that's currently buying, but position yourself to the people who are not currently buying? And I think that's one of the big challenges. Conveying that to a CEO is different. And you need to find a balance between the quick wins, and you need to be able to convey how demand gen helps in terms of how they think about things.
And in your experience, is the 95.5% rule something that resonates with a CEO? Do they understand?
I think they understand. Yeah. I think they understand, but it's also really important that, like, I'm a service provider. So I get brought in when they know something's wrong, right? So I'm usually brought in a context where I get listened to. And I think this is one of the big battles when we talk about people like us, when companies come to us when like shit doesn't work. So they're more willing to listen to ideas. Whereas if you're an in-house marketer since 2 years, it's much harder to introduce these ideas. So that is an important caveat.
Right. Are those your ideal customers? When the shit hits the fan, they come to you?
Well, for example, we mainly focus when we work with smaller companies, we focus on second-time founders,
Hmm.
all right? Because generally, first-time founders might not understand or appreciate, or founders with no executive experience might not appreciate good marketing enough to spend a lot of money, right? Because we're not
Hmm.
cheap. I think that's the first. And the second kind of group of companies that we focus on are companies that have hit that plateau in growth where everybody has failed. And that's really what we try to market. So somebody has come in, they've had an agency, they've had an in-house team, they haven't been able to deliver long-term growth. We always talk about predictable growth engines, right? You don't want to just get the next 3 months of growth. You need something where you know that over a 5-year period, if I keep investing in this, it's going to work. Well, the fact is Google Ads doesn't keep scaling over a 5-year period if you keep investing in it. Outbound sales, probably neither. What does work is kind of multi-pronged demand campaigns that help develop the market whilst you're also trying to capture it. And it's finding a good
Mhm.
balance. You need to find a good balance between these activities to get buy-in.
Okay. I have a question for our listeners. So chime in and in the comments, please respond. But I'm really curious what your biggest challenge is when trying to balance short-term sales goals with the long-term brand and demand building. What type of discussions you have internally with your colleagues? So if you can share your thoughts with us, that would be really great. Ferdinand, can you share a real-world example of a company that successfully aligned commercial goals with a demand generation strategy? What did they do differently? Oh,
Yeah. I mean, I'll give you a famous example that we've not been involved with, and then I'll give you a concrete example that we have been involved with.
mhm.
So a famous example I would say is a company called Clay, right? Clay, if you ask anyone around, like B2B outbound sales automation, everyone will recommend Clay. In fact, a year ago, I found myself recommending Clay, and I had never even used it. And I think that's the true sign of good demand gen. If people are recommending a product because you're like, hey, these guys must be good at what they do. Like if the content is so strong and the presence is so strong, and I think what Clay does really well is the influencer play, right? You have Obeyed and you have all these different people who are building these influencer plays. Now, Hockey Stack and Clay are two companies that leverage content in a very, very different way. Hockey Stack created the Netflix for revenue teams, right? And they have fun videos. They tap into that audience, but it's like sometimes it's talking about B2B marketing or B2B sales whilst playing video games. It's like content formats that the kids, and by the kids I mean people in until their mid 20s, let's say, or early or late 20s, they love that stuff. That's the content they consume in their free time. And I think these are companies that do this really, really well. Leveraging
That sort of
influencers.
marketing is extremely connected, right? The product marketing, the product market fit of Clay is really well, huh? One of the best.
Yeah, but Clay doesn't do something that hasn't been done before necessarily. I mean, there's several other players in this market, many much more established, many with the potential to outplay them. And they've managed to jump. I mean, they're not the number one. I think Apollo is still the number one, if I'm not mistaken. But Clay have jumped up to the top of this list with with a very strong brand play. And the truth is, I don't know how good the product is. I've only used it in limited context, so I can't really do an in-depth comparison to Apollo or other tools. But what I can tell you is that everyone's talking about them. And if you ask me to do outbound, the first thing I do is I Google, like if you ask me to do outbound, like to look for an outbound tool tomorrow, I'm going to Google three products. I'm going to Google Apollo, I'm going to Google Clay, and I'm going to Google Lemlist. Why? Because I've been following Guillaume Maubeche, the founder of Lemlist, on LinkedIn, even though he gets banned every 6 months and then still rebuilds his thousands of followers within a couple of days. I've been following him for years, and he posts really good content. He doesn't talk about Lemlist. He doesn't talk about his product. He doesn't talk about it's not salesy at all. He just talks about the problems that people in his target audience face, and it's relatable. So I've been following him. So he's the first. He's one of the first tools that come to mind. Clay is the second because I love their content and I follow it and I find it entertaining. And then Apollo is one that came through a lot of recommendations. And Apollo actually wins a lot on price at the moment. I think that's one of the reasons that they win as well. But it just goes to show that the product and the marketing have to go completely hand in hand, right? And this is a good example that if the Clay product were terrible, this marketing play would not necessarily work because people would churn.
Right. What is your take on founder-led growth? I mean, I think this is really exciting, especially in IT, SaaS, people have this great idea, they start building a product and they're all excited. Um, SaaS, or sorry, founder-led growth. I think that's one of the biggest challenges there. Yeah, but why don't they go on LinkedIn? I mean, we have this, a few guys in the US that are really great at it. What's his name?
Adam
Robin?
Robinson.
Yeah, he's amazing, right? I mean,
Yeah.
building an audience. Why here in the Netherlands, CEOs and founders don't, show themselves?
I think there's a cultural thing. I think Europeans tend to talk about themselves less than Americans. That's a very broad generalization, but I think there's definitely a cultural element that there's a bit of a discomfort to putting yourself out there. I also think that we talked about how by, doing the whole ebook white paper play, we shot ourselves in the foot. I think for every founder who's really good at building an audience, there's a lot of bullshitters out there who actually don't create real value and they're just good at influencing, right? Like 9 out of 10 people who have a lot of influence on LinkedIn. I've now said 9 out of 10 like 6 times. So don't quote me on any of these statistics. I'm just trying to say a majority of people who are really big on LinkedIn are not actually necessarily delivering a lot of value on the product service front. So there's a few different factors why I think it's not there. Um, it's also really hard to I think there's value there, but I think you need to be careful because you have to want to do it. And I'm not sure I know of founders who have a really strong brand where I know that the product is amazing. So it's really hard for me to judge. I know that when I was a founder of my previous company, I did not have the time to do it. So I think you
Right.
need to have the right audience, you need to have the right ideas, you need to be willing to put yourself out there, and you need to want to do it. I think like because we work with founders who have big audiences and they don't want to do it. And it's really hard to get them to do it if they don't want to do it. You can try and
Mm.
get, ghostwriters and stuff, but it's more effective when you do it yourself.
Yeah, and I was a founder of a marketing agency myself once, doing marketing and sales. I was the guy everybody knew, and it cost me like half of the value of my company when I sold it because the new owner said, "Yeah, but although you're gone, who's going to replace you?" That's the other side
But
of it.
also, I would add here, as a marketing agency, you're trading in knowledge, right?
Mm.
So a thought leadership LinkedIn play when you're trading in knowledge is an amazingly good fit, right? Like if you're selling knowledge expertise, then it's a very natural play. If you're selling enterprise security software for Google Drive, it's not necessarily the most natural play. So it's also about, and I think this other thing is like thought leadership doesn't have to be LinkedIn, right? It can be YouTube. It can be it can be it's escaping me now. hacker news, for example. Like I know people whose target audience is developers, and they do a lot on hacker news, and they're very successful there. But I think thought
Okay.
leadership can take a lot of different forms. The LinkedIn iteration is one iteration that works really well if your audience is on LinkedIn and you trade in a service or a product that's really fitting to that audience. But there are other ways you can do thought leadership as well. I think thought leadership always pays off in the long run.
Okay, absolutely. Sriyam added his own comment. Um, Biggest challenge they experience at the moment at Uber is cross-selling to existing customers. Yeah, I mean, are we all still too much focused on new customers, new business, and are we ignoring existing customers too much? Maybe.
I can understand that for a product like Uber, when you have a lot of different services, you need to find that balance, right? If somebody's only done the Uber rideshare and then they need to switch to Uber Eats, that's a pretty big switch. The one thing I will say is the B2C world is something I don't touch so much because I think I have ideas on it and I think I know about it, but I'll very quickly get schooled. So I know in the B2B space, a lot of companies focus too much on acquisition and not enough on retention. However, it also goes the other way. A lot of people have this idea that retention can just grow your business like crazy, and that's not necessarily true either. So
Yeah,
you need to have a good balance. There's
absolutely.
practical factors that play that are really important.
Final question, Freddie. So I'm the CEO again. I invited you to my office and say, okay, I believe you guys have a great story to tell. How are we going to work together? What KPIs are we going to put on paper?
So with I like to work with campaigns. Again, it depends. And it's super annoying to answer every question with it depends because it really does depend. And I think the biggest problem we have in marketing right now is we have this culture of playbooks and cheat sheets and copycats and templates and like, oh, this works. It's like the what in B2B marketing is not rocket science. Like every B2B company needs to do the same sort of things. They need to build a strong brand. They need to they need to do good product activation. They need to have a very clear marketing to sales like handover process. They need to be on the ball when it comes to sales support and service. Like every company needs to do the same sort of thing. The what is not hard, right? There's like four ways to grow a business. The how is really hard. And that's the first thing I say to every company I talk to. It's all about the how. So the what comes from analyzing your data, looking at your market, understanding what's working, what's not working. The how comes from talking to your customers and from experimenting and testing. So whilst I cannot give you concrete metrics necessarily on demand in the next 3 months, what I can say is, okay, are like the decision to generate demand and build a strong brand is not an ROI based decision. It's a strategic decision. You need to strategically decide, I want to be the company that everybody thinks of. And very often when I say to founders, we're going to build
Absolutely.
this campaign so that every ICP knows who we are, they actually respond really well to that because I'm not promising them leads. I'm saying, what would you do if, like, we work with a biotech company, for example, and I said, what if every chief scientist officer at every one of your 500 target companies or 800 target companies knew who you are and what you do? Would you
Yeah.
want that? Because we could achieve that in 6 months. And they usually say yes. And then you need to start, and it's never like black and white. It's not demand or leads. Like demand and leads, like they go hand in hand. Demand is just a longer term way to generate leads in the future, and you just need to make those connections clear to them. So I think we do a lot as account based marketing campaigns, and those are a really good way to ease in the demand gen idea. So what we say is we have a list of 100 companies we want to do outbound to. What if we spent the first 2 months just creating a strong sense of, basically a strong awareness amongst these 200 leads. And I can give you this is now I can give you that concrete example. We worked with a company called Cutter, like wood manufacturing company. There was no Google search for their solution, completely new category. Like everybody loves to say they're building a new category. They actually were. There was no high intent. There was no lead gen play. It didn't work. So what did we do? Is we took a list of 200 companies. We really focused on one ICP, a list of 200 companies, interior bauer, like basically like, you know, local wood manufacturing companies in the Netherlands. We made that list, and instead of doing cold outreach to them, we started by just creating some ads. But the ads were not salesy. They did not mention the service. They were just talking about the problems. Like, for example, wouldn't it be good if you could grow without having to hire new people? Or you don't have to, you don't have to hire someone into the middle of Gelderland in order to grow your business. And these are like real problems we got from interviews. We target them with these problems. Layer one. Layer number two was we got one of the founders who was himself previously one of these people, like an interior bar, to do thought leadership. We made a mini podcast. We had him post on LinkedIn regularly. And then we took those LinkedIn posts and we pushed them into this LinkedIn ad campaign. So we were using ads together with organic to create awareness amongst this audience. And we ran this for about 6 weeks. Then we started running webinars on top of it, like really practical workshop webinars. And then what we did is we went to the factories and we asked them to create a wooden part, like a real wooden, like a sample. And we sent it to them in the mail, like old school in the mail. So there was online, there was offline, there was thought leadership, there was demand gen, there was everything packed into one. And then we did the sales outreach. And
Yeah.
basically, we went from needing 12 calls, cold calls to get a meeting, down to needing 3 calls to get a meeting. And yes, it took me 6 months to be able to show, or 3 months to show those numbers, and everybody was wowed. But every step of the way, I showed the signals. I showed which companies were looking at the ads, which users were engaging with them, how often were they seeing it. So I'm constantly looking at signals and early indicators. And then, of course, every 3 to 6 months, you do need to look back and say, and what we did in this case is we showed them the 200 companies where we did the demand gen play, and we showed them the previous 200 companies where we didn't. And
Mhm.
there was like a 3x difference in conversion, like serious difference.
Right. This is
Yeah.
all account-based marketing type of marketing, right?
I mean, yeah, I mean, account-based marketing gets used very loosely, but I think it's generally a pretty good introduction
Right.
into understanding the principles of what demand can do.
Mhm. Okay. Just one more question. The market is changing. Marketing is not changing. The market is changing. Um, we traditionally here in the Netherlands and in Europe are really sales led. Are we becoming a little bit more marketing led in within companies? Is marketing taking over a little bit or not?
I don't think so. I wish they did, but I think in a lot of companies, marketing still struggles. Marketing
Yeah.
still struggles to get buy-in, and marketing still struggles to get their ideas across. But it's also a byproduct. Like, what is marketing? Like, we hire, like every role we put live, we get 200 to 300 applications, right? Because we're opinionated, we put our ideas out there. The amount of people who are in marketing because they didn't know what they wanted to do is crazy. Like, there's marketers who are passionate about marketing, and there's a lot of marketers who just are there because they don't know what else they wanted to do. So I still
Mhm.
think if I look back like 5 years ago, you'd ask me who's a really good head of growth for my company. I could have given you 20 names. Every single one of them has their own business now. And I think the same goes for you, same goes for me. Anyone who's good at this stuff starts their own business. So I do think there's an uphill battle, but that's something we're trying to fix with what we're doing. Is we're trying to make it easier. We're trying. That's why I try to push back against these semantic debates and the nitty gritty debates. Like we need to equip marketing teams with the skills, the soft skills, and the leadership skills, and the commercial knowledge, or the economic knowledge, to position themselves within their companies more effectively.
Absolutely. The marketers are not, they don't have a seat on the table yet. Why is that? I mean, what needs to be done?
But
It's frustrating.
I think a lot of marketers do have a seat at the table, but I think their names change. They become CROs, they become CCOs.
Yeah. But they, CMO in most cases is just a fancy name for, you know, a marketer who is just a B2B marketer.
But I
You
think the
know,
way that we change it, the way that we change it is we stop having really long debates in the comment section. And I'm a part of this. Like, there's a lot of super smart people out there, like Dale Harris and Liam Maroney, yourself, and myself. And sometimes the four of us, together with Toby and a bunch of other people, we're having debates about like the nitty gritty details. And I think that's not what founders and people with a seat at the table care about. People with a seat at the table care about the connection between demand gen and revenue. And the most important thing is that connection exists, right? It's not as easy to show as the connection between a demo and revenue. It's not as easy to show as the connection between retention and churn and revenue, but that connection exists. And I think the better we get at speaking that strategic, and I think this is the other thing, most marketers don't understand commercial, they don't understand sales, they don't understand the business side. And I think that's something that marketers need to get better at. And I know a lot of CMOs who are very successful on the CMO level, but they
and
tend to understand business economics.
speak the language of the CMO. Oh, sorry, speak
Exactly.
the language of the CEO and CFO, right?
Exactly.
There's a disconnect in language there as
There's a
well.
disconnect. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe one
I,
last thing.
yeah,
I think the way the world is changing, the companies that do marketing well are the companies that are going to succeed. And I think the changes you talk about will happen also a bit naturally. The thing is, until now, you could get away without marketing. You could get away with a lot of sales and products, but I think that's changing with the saturation and the competition and AI making product differentiation harder. The role of marketing is only going to increase. And we're going to see the seat at the table change as well, but we need to change with it as well.
Absolutely. That's a strong, powerful message. And I fully agree, Ferdinand. Thank you for being my guest in this InDemand live Q&A. We had a few questions
Thanks.
for Sriyan. I don't know what the other people were thinking, but it must have been really interesting. Thank you very much. And I'm following you on LinkedIn. I will
Likewise.
advise everybody else to do follow Ferdy and his team, his crew. Who else is on the team?
We're now 7 people going on 9, so it's growing. But Joline van Gieke, Clement Dumont, Toby Leach, we've got a few people on the team.
And you will be really visible in the next few months, doing all kind of events, your own community, stuff like that, huh?
We do a monthly meetup. We do a monthly meetup, one tomorrow actually, about how to get buy-in from leadership on your marketing in Amsterdam. And we're doing a conference in September 18th. It's not live yet, but we're going to be doing a conference called Mastering B2B Demand. And that's going to be all about contextualizing marketing within that broader GTM context. So,
Okay, absolutely. Great. Thank you, Ferdinand. I enjoyed
thanks, Aldo.
talking to you.
Apologies for
Yeah,
the technical difficulties.
no problem, man. No problem. All right. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye. Tot ziens iedereen.